Sweet lover and a baker attend the World Patterson Tournament. That said, the day is the second and the last day of the Patterson World Tournaments. There are several contestants for this position, but there is a particular contestant on which everyone focuses. This contestant is the one who has wowed everyone since the start of the ceremony, and there are even rumors that he will be the one to be crowned as the greatest patisserie that ever existed on the face of the earth. For that particular ceremony, he intends to create the candy sculpture, and just as he had planned, he creates a sculpture that is made of sugar. The sculpture is as giant as you can imagine, and even as he concludes his work, he is also proud of himself. He is super excited to have lived the dream he wants for himself. He dreams for that day to come, and his day is here. He hears the announcement that all the contestants should bring their sweets outside for the final checking and grading, and he calls for the help of one of his colleagues to help him carry this candy sculpture. The sculpture is so huge that he can't carry it alone, and as they try to carry it together, he sees his great dream slipping off his hands. He sees the sculpture falling off and right in his face. He sees it coming to his side. He stands there and he watches as the candy crumbles and falls on his head. He falls and starts bleeding in his final moment on earth. He wonders if he is dying. He can't believe he is dying before actualizing his dreams. He reminds himself that he has worked for that day since the day he was born, and on that day, it turns out to be his death day. He refuses to accept that fact, and he concludes that God is wicked as he closes his eyes to that earth. He hears a voice asking him if he wants a second chance. The voice tells him that he is ready to give him a second chance he wants, and from that day he will be called Pastry Miller Mortel. As the voices told him, he reincarnates into another life and he finds himself as a child to Casserole Morton and Agnes Mortel. The young couple lives in a rural and empty fief. His father, God, is a war reward the land of mortal. The thief is so empty that it can barely produce wheat, let alone any other important thing needed for a person to survive. Upon coming to that area with the other people they have found there, his father desires to make the empty fief a livable place for everyone. With the help of everyone in the community, they begin to cultivate the lands and they try to grow wheat. They eventually succeed in growing wheat, but it seems that is the only thing they can get from that city. They continue with their hard work and within some years, the empty town eventually becomes a little more noisy with people scattered around and buildings around. Pastry's father, Casserole, is a war hero. His father is interested in training him to become a warlord like him, so even when Pastry is just at the age of 9, he has started training swords with his father. On this day, he stands by the tree training with his father. His father tells him that he keeps getting distracted as he trains and should try to hold the grip of his sword better so he can tackle better. He has the swords as he keeps fighting against Casserole and explaining his new life. It's been 9 years in this new life, and he can attest to it that his life is awesome. He has a very caring father and mother. He is the last born of the family, and he has 5 elder sisters. They treat him with joy and happiness. Indeed, he enjoys that love, except for the fact that the thief they live in can only germinate wheat, and they can't even grow beans or anything that he could use to make sweets. He misses making sweets, and he can't imagine his life without making sweets. He remembers his life of sweet making, and he thinks about his old life. He gets distracted, and Casserole hits him and falls on his sword. His sword falls behind him, and he collapses in front of his father, admitting that he has lost the fight. Although his father wants them to continue the duel, one of the members of the community who also doubles as his father's retainer, Fuel, comes to meet them and calls out for Casserole. Fuel goes there and tells them that it is almost time for their meal, so they can pack up the training and go to eat. Casserole tells Pastry that he should leave for the day and go to rest. He asks Fuel what he has come to meet him for, and Fuel tells him that he has 2 pieces of news. The first one is good news, while the second one is bad news. So Casserole should choose the news he wants to hear first. Casserole admits that he would have to hear the 2 pieces of news regardless, so it is better he starts with the good one. Fuel starts with the good news and tells him that their beans cultivation is growing so well, and they have a very good harvest that year. While they are happy about it, he admits that the good result is only because they took Pastry's advice when he told them that they should put limes on their beans cultivation, and the cultivation will breed a good harvest. Fuel asks Pastry where he gets his good suggestions from, and Pastry tries to imagine how he could use the beans. He says that they could use the beans to make sweet items, and he even starts listing out the supposed processes. The adults look at him weirdly, asking him what he is saying and where he has heard all those things from. He can't tell them that he is reincarnating, so he tells them that he is only daydreaming. They comment that his daydreams most times are always absurd. After that, Casserole recalls that Fuel has a second piece of news. He asks him what the bad news is, and Fuel tells him that the bad news is that the bandits that had attacked the kingdom of Retests weren't defeated, and the bandits are on their way to their city. Bandits attacking their thief means one thing, which is the fact that the bandits will destroy their entire fields, and they will steal their harvest too. Pastry is more affected because his dream of creating sweets in the world is just coming to a realization, and he feels he wouldn't allow anyone to destroy his dreams at all. Fuel tells them that the bandits are about 50, and they will reach the city in about 2 months. He claims the only way their city can survive that attack is to plan toward it. That seems impossible to Pastry because if they gather all the men in their city and even in the neighboring towns, they will barely see 30 men, so the idea is dead on arrival because there is no way the 30 men they find can defeat the 50 fully equipped bandits. Casserole also starts looking for a solution. He goes to the canal and suggests that they lay an ambush for the bandits before they arrive, and they will also try to get reinforcement from the Kingdom of Retests. That seems like a more possible idea, but the Kingdom of Retests will never help them. The reason is that their inability to defeat the bandits has already made them weak, and if the members of that small community succeed in defeating the bandits instead of the big kingdom, it will be a bad name to the king. It will destroy his reputation, so the king will also wish that they lose in the fight, and they can call for help from the bigger kingdoms. Casserole also figures that Fuel, while trying to find a solution, says the only solution is to use Pastry. He means they should have Pastry's sanctification. Casserole sees it could be a way out, so he accepts. He gets home and tells Agnes and his daughter Josephine that he is scheduling Pastry's sanctification for the next week. Agnes refuses immediately, but her husband convinces her that it is just for the best of their city and family, so she accepts. Naturally, sanctification is done for kids between the age of 13 to 15, and Pastry is too young. Although Pastry wants it to be what he understands, the reason his mother is against it, Agnes accepts to start the preparation, and she asks for Josephine's help. They both give a very happy smile at the suggestion, and Pastry understands what that means and knows it's not a good idea. They start dressing Pastry up for the preparation and start by giving him feminine clothes. They laugh that the clothes are good on him, and they also bring out makeup to use on him. Since he was a kid, his sisters and mother have treated him like a dress-up doll. They would dress him in a feminine manner, and they would also make him use their jewelry and makeup. He really can't complain because his father doesn't interfere, and it was much worse than that when his other sisters were around. He hopes and prays that he will become an adult soon and get out of those stress. On the day he is traveling for his sanctification ceremony, he goes to the field with his father, who asks him why he is looking that tired on the day he is traveling. He reminds Casserole that he has been working for the past few days, but Casserole laughs at him. Agnes and Josephine also arrive, and before he leaves, the other kids at the village come to bid him goodbye. They disappear from there, and they appear in the kingdom of Bovardia. That is the first time he sees a kingdom as large as that, and the first place they go is the marketplace. He sees several candies and sweet items. He doesn't know that things like that also exist in the world because he hasn't seen them before. He screams that he wants them, and his father promises him that if he passes his sanctification process, he will allow him to choose whatever he wants in the market. Pastry starts thinking of the exact thing he wants in the market, and suddenly his eyes catch something he couldn't have expected to see there. He sees apples. He is so excited that he jumps to the stall. His father tells him they are bonkas and they are very rare in their city because it is cultivated in the north. Pastry tells his father that they should buy some on their way home, and he can grow it in their city. Casserole is so excited about his son's intelligence. He hopes that with Pastry's intelligence, he will make the city of Morden a big city and also control several knights. On the other hand, Pastry dreams that he can bake his apple, make apple pies, create honey through bees, and make a very sweet world. They arrive at the church for his sanctification. Casserole tells the priest about it, but the priest feels pastry is too small. They start the process regardless. At home, Josephine asks Fuel what true sanctification is about, and Fuel lectures her that it is a process where they find out the number of magic values in a child. For the process, they will lock the child in a dark, empty room until they can see how much he can endure. The rationale is that magic only appears when someone is without help, and he will be able to use his magic in that situation. They lock pastry for a day and a half, but the priest says he can still endure until the process ends. He claims he is shocked that pastry could endure that much. Pastry is thinking about sweets, and he doesn't know anything until his father calls to wake him up after 2 days. The priest tells Pastry that he has tried, and he has to seal the process with the scripture. As the priest reads out the scripture, Pastry sees himself entering a trance, and they can all see the spiritual baubles around him. After he finishes, the priest admits that Pastry has much magical power. Casserole gives the priest some coins and leaves. He goes to the market where they buy apples, and after buying enough, the merchant gives them as gifts. He sits to eat it with his father and tells his father that they shouldn't tell his mother and Josephine that they ate the best of the apples. On the other hand, the priest checks the coins and says it's not enough for him to keep his mouth shut, and he will reveal what Casserole had come to the church for. The group of bandits raised the village in flames and gathered their loot at the center of the burning village, looking quite content at what they managed to gather. Meanwhile, while Casserole inspects the fortification process over at his end, one of his men informs him that the bandits have already started to make their move, and they have attacked and burnt down a village in Lip Tavern, which is close to his territory. This news greatly disturbs Casserole because he only just arrived from the capital 3 weeks ago to commence the fortification process of the village. The fact that they've already gotten to the Lip Tavern domain means that they have to hasten preparations because they can no longer work with the 2 weeks deadline they are supposed to use to prepare for possible bandit attacks. Immediately, Pastry is given a message of summons to various village leaders as well as Cointreau and Glockage, who are together for an urgent meeting at once. While he sets out to deliver the message, he worries that the bandits' insistent attacks would become a stumbling block towards his dream of creating a land filled with awesome delicacies. He hopes that his dad succeeds in his plans to protect the village with so little manpower at his disposal. At the same time, Casserole orders the smaller villagers under him to fill their wells with sand and evacuate their homes immediately. Everyone hastily moves to the main village where he uses the opportunity to separate the able-bodied men who can fight, as well as the farmers who he orders to fill their storage houses with as much food as possible. He makes sure that everyone is given a duty, and while this is going on, Fuel informs him that the supplies would only last for 3 days at best and suggests that they might have to take their chance by reducing the rations. Pastry watches worriedly as the only weapon makers they have work on their craft at such a slow pace given their age and pace. He worries that the men won't be able to keep up with a prolonged battle with the bandits. While he brainstorms for a way to help his dad out, he is joined by Mark and Lumi, his self-proclaimed lieutenants who have come to assist him. They tell him to instruct them on what needs to be done since they are supposed to work for him just like their fathers are working for his dad, who has the title of the village suzerain. The thought of having retainers at his age makes him uncomfortable, so he tells them both to behave like the normal childhood friends that they are to him, rather than treating him like a noble. He wishes he could just goof around with the other village kids like they usually do, but the menace of ravaging bandits has ruined their simple lifestyle. He then asks the pair to gather a bunch of small rocks that can be tossed by kids their age. Although they have no idea what he plans to do with the rocks, they obey his instructions nevertheless. While they are at it, he also reminds them to be conscious of their surroundings and head back to the village the moment they notice anything out of the ordinary. The pair then begins their task of hurling rocks with a basket behind their backs while they pick the rocks into the baskets. Lumi asks Mark if he knows what kind of magic Pastry ended up with. Mark tells her Pastry is keeping his magic a secret because he is still practicing how to use it. Lumi thinks it has to be something awesome for Pastry to keep as a secret, but Mark argues that he is still the best when it comes to pure physical brawls, and he is not the least bit intimidated. Just then, Mark hears a sound coming from deep within the forest. At first, Lumi thinks he's trying to prank her. However, after listening intently, They become certain that the bandits are marching towards the village. He immediately heads back to the village and informs the man at the gate, who moves to remove the bridge in front of the entrance and lock the gate. With the bandits' imminent arrival, everyone who was previously calm suddenly becomes anxious and doubtful if they would be able to actually fight against the notorious bandits who have already burned down towns and villages along the way. Just then, Casserole arrives. To put their anxieties at ease, he tells them that they must not let the bandits into the village because that would mean their wives and kids would be killed, their property stolen, and their homes burnt. He informs them of his resolve to protect the village and urges the men to dedicate their hearts to protect their family. With this speech, he manages to give the men courage, and they immediately move to their various positions while they await the bandits. Fuel suggests that the bandits might wait till daybreak to attack since they don't know the area very well and would be at a disadvantage at night. However, Casserole tells him they would definitely attack because the other territories they've raided won't have enough food to sustain their massive troop. He suggests that they must be low on food and strongly believes they won't spare a moment before they attack the village. Despite his explanation, Fuel still thinks that it might be a wrong move to keep the townsfolk awake all through the night because it'll certainly put them at a massive disadvantage if the bandits decide to wait out the night and attack the next morning. Casserole then asks his smart son, Pastry, for his opinion on the matter, but he tells them that they have too little information about the bandits to make assumptions. He explains that they'll need to check how much supplies they have, as well as their numbers, as that would be the only way to determine their course of action. Just as it is with preparing to feed a large amount of people, he gets carried away thinking about the matter and trying to solve it the way he does in his previous life. But by the time he comes back to his senses, Casserole has already decided on his next plan of action. He takes Fuel along with him to check out the enemy base and ascertain the might of their forces. He leaves Pastry in charge of the village and heads out to investigate immediately, knowing full well the risk involved. Once he's gone, Pastry tells Mark to pass a message to the northern gate that they are to use flame arrows to signal the enemy's arrival. He also instructs Lumi to tell the craftsmen to prepare the flames and arrows to be used when the time comes. He also informs the pair that the arrows serve a dual purpose of helping his dad find his way back to the village should they lose their way during a night chase by the bandits. Mark suggests that he could just use his teleportation spells, but Pastry tells him he won't be able to take Fuel and the horses with him because of the weight limit. Back inside the village, Pastry finds some kind of scared and thus firms his resolve to protect them in place of his father, the suzerain, no matter what happens. Meanwhile, Casserole and Fuel begin their investigation in the forests. He uses his magic to observe the enemy base from a distance. He finds out the bandits aren't just regular guys but ex-military soldiers with 5 good horses. He also finds out that the bandits number up to 70 in total, which makes Casserole conclude that they must be professionals. He also reports that the bandits have taken a number of villagers hostage and surmises that they plan to sell them into slavery. Once they finish up with their investigation, they hurriedly set out to the enemy base for a surprise attack. Over at the bandits' base, the minions report to their boss that the neighboring villages have been deserted by its occupants as they prepare to move over to the main village. Casserole and his trusty right-hand man, Fuel, show up out of nowhere and begin slaying the bandits. They focus on killing the weaklings while they hurriedly make their way past them. The leader tries to instruct his men to be wary of the horses. However, by the time they can stay in formation, they've already lost some of their men. The Lord decides it'll be too risky to make another charge now that they are organized. So he instructs Fuel to make a retreat. Back to the village. The men immediately chase after them. Even when their leader tries to make them stop, with this plan, they manage to separate some of the bandits from the main group. Over at the village, an arrow is shot immediately they notice their arrival from a distance. Fuel thinks that Pastry must have set a trap since he ordered the guards to shoot an arrow. Although they have no idea what his plan is, they decide to pass through another route back to the village. When Pastry is notified of the incoming enemies, he musters his kid troops who immediately start raining stones down the path with slings. They set the stones on fire for added damage, and this move manages to halt the pursuit of the bandits. Thanks to Pastry's brilliant plan, they continue to rain down flaming stones on the bandits who are struggling to pinpoint where the attack is coming from. Casserole and Fuel then use the opportunity to charge at the bandits while they are confused. When the leader catches up to them, he decides to head directly to the gate to stop the attack. He dashes from the cliff without a bridge and manages to land on the edge of the other side. Since he managed to make it in one piece, his men also rally behind him, ready to jump at the same time. The villagers at the gate try to attack with the tools, but he simply dodges their attack while he makes his way above the wall. He succeeds in getting through the wall and immediately starts slaying the weak villagers one after the other in an angry frenzy. A warrior immediately comes to face him in a duel while the kids hold back the other bandits who manage to make it past the wall. When he notices Thranduil and Giselle are the real problem, he rushes towards them to solve the problem. He swings his sword at them, but they are shielded by Pastry, who ends up injured. The leader immediately takes Pastry hostage with his sword on his neck, and this makes the other fighters hesitant to approach him. While everyone is distracted, Pastry notices a man who is in severe pain and uses his magic to replicate the man's injuries on the other bandits. They all start screaming in pain with no idea of what hit them. And while the leader struggles to understand Pastry